the Destiny had been alone for a very long time. Not alone in the way a ship feels when its crew sleeps through a long FTL jump, or the quiet that settles over a vessel between port calls. Alone in the way that only something ancient understands, the profound, cathedral silence of billions of light years between itself and anything that remembered it existed. The automated systems cycled. The hull groaned against the pull of distant gravity wells. And the crew of 80-some souls aboard her went about the business of surviving, arguing, and occasionally trusting each other, as humans always do when the universe gives them no other option. Eli Wallace was on sensor duty when it happened. He almost missed it. He'd been running his fourth recalculation of their next FTL window, half a cup of cold coffee balanced on the console beside him, when the long-range array flickered with something that made his stomach drop straight through the deck plating. Not the hollow sensor ghost of a passing pulsar. Not the electromagnetic wash of a stellar nursery ahead of their course. Something structured. Something with a rhythm that didn't belong to any natural phenomenon he'd catalogued in 3 years aboard this ship. A warp signature. Not ancient. Not Nakai. Not anything in Destiny's database, which meant not anything in the known universe. And Eli had long since learned that when Destiny's database didn't recognize something, the appropriate response was immediate and complete attention. Colonel Young. He kept his voice level. Mostly. You're going to want to see this. Colonel Everett Young arrived on the bridge in under 2 minutes, still pulling his jacket straight, the particular expression on his face that meant he'd been awake for 20 hours and was prepared to be awake for 20 more. Rush materialized from the direction of the research section like he'd been summoned, which meant he'd been monitoring the sensors remotely, which meant he'd already seen it and said nothing, which meant, as usual, he was already 3 moves ahead and keeping score. Source? Young asked. Closing, Eli said. Fast. Warp 7, maybe 8, whatever that means out here. It's not FTL like ours. The field geometry is completely different. Symmetrical. Almost elegant. He paused. It's a ship. Rush leaned over his shoulder without being invited. Manifestly not one of ours. Battle stations, Young said quietly. And get me a visual. What appeared on the forward display was compact and aggressive. A dark, angular hull built like a clenched fist, nacelles swept back with the posture of something that had been in fights and won them. Running lights. Hull plating that had taken damage recently and been repaired with the pragmatic efficiency of a crew that didn't have time for aesthetics. It dropped out of warp with a precision that suggested the person at the helm had done it 10,000 times, holding position off Destiny's bow at a distance that was either respectful or tactical. Possibly both. Then it hailed them. The voice that came through was deep, deliberate, and carried the particular authority of someone who had learned long ago that the room quiets when they speak. This is Captain Benjamin Sisko of the Federation starship Defiant. We have experienced a navigational emergency and are operating at reduced capacity. We have no hostile intentions. Please respond. Young looked at Rush. Rush looked at the sensor readings. Eli looked at both of them. They're scanning us, Rush said, with something uncomfortably close to admiration. Thoroughly. Their sensors are quite good, actually. Are they weapons hot? Young asked. Eli checked. Powered but not targeting. Yet. Young straightened. Pressed the comm. This is Colonel Everett Young, commanding the vessel Destiny. Stand by. He released the channel and turned to the room. Options. We scan them back, Rush said immediately. Their technology is extraordinarily interesting. I wasn't asking you, Rush. You should have been. Eli raised a hand carefully. They said reduced capacity. If that's true, they're not a threat we can handle. And they reached us, which means their propulsion is functional. Which means, potentially, they have navigation capabilities we don't. Young was quiet for a moment. The Destiny hummed around them, ancient and patient, as if it had been waiting for exactly this kind of problem to arrive and was content to let the humans sort it out. Open a channel, On the view screen, Benjamin Sisko appeared, broad-shouldered, shaved head, a uniform that was clearly military in design but carried the unmistakable markings of something exploratory. Behind him, Sisko's bridge was alive with crew at stations. A Trill woman at the helm whose spots traced up from her collar, a Klingon standing with arms crossed and the expression of someone professionally unimpressed, a Bajoran woman whose posture suggested she'd been in tighter spots than this and had opinions about all of them. Sisko's eyes moved across everything visible on Destiny's bridge with the practiced assessment of a man who had learned to read rooms quickly. They settled on Young with the particular weight of one commanding officer recognizing another. "Colonel Young," he said. "Captain Sisko." Young matched the register exactly. "You said navigational emergency. A rift. Bajoran in origin, we believe, connected to an orb anomaly we were investigating near the Denorio's belt. It deposited us here. A beat. Wherever here is. Approximately 3 billion light-years from Earth," Young said. "Our Earth." Sisko absorbed that without visible reaction, which told Young quite a bit about the man. "And yours? Not reachable. Not by us. Not from here." Another beat. Longer this time. "Then it seems," Sisko said, "we have something in common." Behind Young, Rush had already turned back to his console, fingers moving with quiet intensity, pulling every thread of data the sensors were offering. Whatever the Defiant was, whatever technology had carried it here, he intended to understand it completely. The gate, the problem, between these two crews wasn't hostility. It was something more complicated than that. It was that both of them were right. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop a character and a universe in the comments below. Indeed. The first joint meeting happened in Destiny's mess hall because it was the only space large enough and neutral enough to prevent either crew from feeling like they were being processed. Young chose the location deliberately. Not the gate room, which carried too much of Destiny's ancient authority. Not the bridge, which was his ground. Somewhere ordinary. Somewhere that smelled like reconstituted protein and bad coffee, where the lighting flickered on the port side because O'Brien, Chief Miles O'Brien, had already noticed and was visibly restraining himself from asking permission to fix it. Sisko arrived with 4. Dax, O'Brien, Worf, and Bashir. Young countered with Rush, Eli, Camille Ray, and Greer, which was a deliberate choice, science, logistics, and someone who would shoot if shooting became necessary, balanced against someone who understood institutional politics. Ray had raised an eyebrow at Greer's inclusion. Young had ignored it. They sat across from each other with the careful spacing of people who understood that proximity implied trust they hadn't yet established. Sisko opened. "I'll be direct, Colonel. My crew's priority is returning to our own space. Whatever assistance we can offer in exchange for navigational cooperation, we're prepared to discuss." "Navigational cooperation," Young repeated. "You understand where we are. 3 billion light-years out. No conventional return route." Sisko's jaw was set but his voice was even. "We've been in difficult positions before. Not like this one." "No," Sisko agreed. "Not exactly like this one." Dax leaned forward slightly, her eyes moving between Eli and the bulkhead behind him with the expression of someone whose 8 lifetimes of scientific curiosity had just been significantly activated. "This ship," she said. "The construction materials, the power signatures, our sensors couldn't identify the origin civilization. And we have fairly comprehensive records." "You wouldn't," Rush said before Young could redirect. "The ancients predate your Federation by several million years. They seeded stargates across 2 galaxies and ascended to a higher plane of existence before your species had developed warp technology." He said it the way he said most things, as information being dispensed to people who should be grateful for it. Destiny was launched before any of that. She is, to put it plainly, the oldest functional vessel either of our civilizations has ever encountered. The silence that followed was the specific silence of people recalibrating. Bashir recovered first. Ascended, he said carefully. You mean? Energy beings. Non-corporeal. Operating on a dimensional plane beyond conventional observation. Rush glanced at him. Your medical training won't cover it. Nicholas. Young's voice carried the particular flatness that meant the next sentence would not be a suggestion. Rush sat back. Marginally. Worf had been silent through the exchange, arms folded, reading the room the way a tactician reads terrain. Now he spoke. Your crew is understaffed for a vessel this size. Your resource reserves are limited. You have been aboard this ship for an extended period without resupply from your home world. He looked at Young directly. You are not in a position to negotiate from strength. Neither are they, Greer said, equally direct. Their shields are at 60%. Their warp core took stress damage in the Rift transit. And they're 3 billion light-years from the nearest Starfleet dock. Worf considered this. Accurate, he said, with something that might, in sufficient light, have resembled respect. Sisko hadn't moved through any of it. Sergeant Greer is correct, he said. We're not here to negotiate from strength. We're here because cooperation is the only logical path for both crews. He looked at Young with the steady attention of a man who had dealt with the Dominion, the Cardassians, the Prophets, and the particular bureaucratic obstruction of Starfleet admirals, and had learned to find the common ground before the situation found it for him. What does Destiny need most right now? Young held the look for a moment. Power. Biological supplies. Time to calculate our next FTL window without a hostile contact interrupting the process. Sisko nodded once. Chief O'Brien can assess your power systems within the hour. We carry replicator stock that can supplement your biological supplies. He paused. In return, we need access to your star charts, whatever Destiny has mapped on her route. And we need your people's expertise on the Rift phenomenon. If there's a way home through whatever brought us here, we intend to find it. Young glanced at Eli, who gave the fractional nod that meant the math wasn't impossible. Then Young looked at Rush, which was a different kind of question entirely. Rush's expression was the careful neutral of a man who was already thinking 4 conversations ahead of the one currently happening. Destiny's database may contain information relevant to the Rift's origin, he said. I would need access to the Defiant's navigational records. All of them. Supervised access, Sisko said. Naturally, Rush replied, in a tone that meant he found supervision conceptually interesting but personally inapplicable. O'Brien was already looking at the flickering light panel with the expression of a man whose hands had made a decision his mouth hadn't announced yet. He caught Young's eye. If it's all right with you, Colonel, that conduit junction is a fire hazard. Young almost smiled. Knock yourself out, Chief. O'Brien was up and moving before the sentence finished, pulling a tricorder with the comfortable efficiency of someone who spoke fluent engineering in any language. Beside him, Eli watched with undisguised fascination, already formulating questions he was trying to decide whether it was too soon to ask. The meeting hadn't produced trust. It had produced something more durable, mutual recognition that neither crew could afford the alternative. Outside the mess hall viewports, Destiny continued her course through the dark, ancient and indifferent, carrying her cargo of complicated humans toward a destination none of them fully understood. She had waited millions of years for crew worthy of the journey. She could wait a little longer to decide if these qualified. Miles O'Brien had worked on Cardassian life support systems, Federation holosuits running corrupted programs, Bajoran or processors held together with prayer and salvaged components, and once, memorably, a Jem'Hadar ship that had been designed by beings who apparently considered maintenance access a philosophical weakness. Destiny made all of that feel straightforward. He moved through her engineering corridors with his tricorder running continuously, cataloging failures and near failures and things that had stopped being failures only because the ship had quietly compensated for them without telling anyone. The conduit junction in the mess hall had been the obvious problem. What lay beneath it was a cascading series of power distribution irregularities that spread through the ship's secondary grid like fractures in old glass. Each one stable in isolation, collectively a system's failure waiting for the wrong moment to introduce itself. "You've been managing this manually?" he asked Eli, who had attached himself to O'Brien's assessment tour with the eagerness of a man who had been the only engineer on a ship that didn't come with a manual. "Managing is generous," Eli said. "Mostly we've been watching things carefully and hoping." "How long?" 3 years, give or take." O'Brien stopped walking. Looked at the conduit schematic on his tricorder. Looked at Eli. 3 years. "We don't exactly have a Starfleet corps of engineers on call." O'Brien exhaled the particular breath of an engineer confronting a problem that offended him professionally and personally. "Right," he said. "Show me the main power distribution node." 2 corridors away, Dax had found the stellar cartography interface, an ancient system that operated on principles her tricorder was only partially equipped to interpret, which meant she was interpreting the rest through 8 lifetimes of accumulated scientific instinct and the particular joy of a Trill who had just encountered something genuinely new. She ran her fingers along the display surface and watched star fields bloom outward in configurations that matched nothing in the Federation's navigational archives. "These coordinates," she said to the young woman, Chloe. She'd introduced herself, quiet and precise, standing beside her. "Destiny has been mapping them continuously?" "Since before any of us arrived," Chloe said. "Dr. Rush thinks the route is deliberate. That the ship is following something specific." "What does Colonel Young think?" Chloe's expression gave the answer before her words did. "He thinks getting home is more important than whatever the destination is." Dax nodded slowly. In her experience, and her experience was extensive in ways most humanoids couldn't fully appreciate, that particular disagreement between the person responsible for the mission and the person obsessed with it never resolved cleanly. It accumulated. "And you?" she asked. Chloe looked at the star field for a moment. "I think they might both be right," she said. "And that's the problem." In the research section, the problem had a name, and it was currently sitting across a console from Benjamin Sisko with the focused intensity of a man who had decided that the most interesting thing in the universe had just walked onto his ship. Nicholas Rush had requested the meeting. Sisko had agreed because in his experience, the most dangerous people aboard any vessel were the ones who operated outside the command structure, and understanding them was preferable to being surprised by them. "The rift that brought you here," Rush said, pulling up a waveform analysis on his screen. "Bajoran in origin, you said? Connected to an orb anomaly. That's our working theory. The Bajoran wormhole, the Celestial Temple, as your people call it, is an artificially constructed stable wormhole." "Yes?" Sisko regarded him carefully. "Constructed by the prophets, who exist outside linear time. Non-linear non-corporeal beings of significant power who communicate through artifacts and are worshipped as divine by a humanoid culture." Rush's tone wasn't dismissive. It was the focused neutrality of a scientist stripping a concept to its components. "That description is not entirely dissimilar to what we understand of the ancients. Ascended beings. Non-corporeal. Occasionally communicative through technology left behind." He turned his screen to face Sisko. "The energy signature of your rift transit matches a resonance frequency I've observed twice before from dormant sections of this ship. Sections we haven't been able to access." Sisko looked at the waveform. Then at Rush. "You think the orb energy and the ancient systems are related?" "I think," Rush said carefully, "that civilizations advanced enough to transcend physical existence may have encountered each other. Or influenced each other. Across galaxies, across time frames we can barely conceptualize." He leaned forward. "And I think your arrival here was not random." Sisko was quiet for a long moment. Outside the viewport, stars moved with the slow patience of things that had existed long before either of them and would exist long after. "You're not the first person to suggest my life follows a pattern I didn't choose," he said finally. "No," Rush said. I imagine not. He pulled up another screen. I need to show you something in the lower decks. A section of the ship that's been sealed since we boarded. Our attempts to access it have been unsuccessful. What kind of attempts? Every kind. A pause. It opened once. Briefly. When Major Ray was conducting a census of the ship's compartments. She reported feeling watched. Then the door sealed again and hasn't responded since. Sisko stood. Show me. Rush hesitated, a micro-expression that Sisko, who had spent years reading people across cultural and species lines, caught clearly. It was the hesitation of a man who wanted something from this, and was deciding how much to reveal about what. One condition, Sisko said. Whatever we find, Colonel Young is informed immediately. Rush's mouth tightened. Of course, he said, in the tone of a man filing that condition somewhere he could revisit later. The corridor that led to the sealed section was older than the rest of the ship, which meant something, on a vessel that was already millions of years old. The materials were different. Darker. The lighting, where it functioned at all, came from a source O'Brien's tricorder had been unable to identify during his survey. The door at the end was not a door so much as a suggestion of one, an outline in the bulkhead that the ship had decided, for its own reasons, to keep closed. Sisko stood before it. And for just a moment, in the particular silence of the ancient corridor, he felt something he had not felt since the wormhole, since the prophets. Since the moment he had first understood that his life was not entirely his own. He felt observed. The door opened for him. Not dramatically. Not with the ancient equivalent of fanfare. It simply decided. A seam appeared in the bulkhead, widened with a sound like pressure equalizing across a very long time, and the darkness beyond resolved into a corridor that Destiny had apparently been keeping to herself. Rush was already through before the threshold had fully cleared, tricorder running, eyes moving with the rapid hunger of a man in the presence of something he'd been trying to reach for months. Sisko followed at a measured pace, the walk of someone who had learned that the spaces that want you to rush are precisely the ones where you shouldn't. The chamber at the corridor's end was circular. The walls curved upward into a dome that caught the low light and distributed it in patterns that weren't quite random. Constellations, Sisko realized, though not any he recognized. Arranged not as navigation but as something closer to narrative. Images told in stars. At the center stood a single console, low and curved, made of the same darkened material as the corridor. Its surface was dormant but not dead. The faint pulse beneath it suggested something waiting rather than something finished. This isn't on any schematic we have of the ship, Rush said, scanning without looking up. Which means Destiny has been concealing it. Actively. His voice carried the particular reverence of a man who had stopped believing in accidents years ago. The energy readings are consistent with what I showed you. The resonance frequency. It's strongest here. Sisko moved to the console. Didn't touch it. Looked at the star patterns on the walls instead, moving his eyes through them the way he'd learned to read the orb visions, not searching for linear meaning but letting the pattern find him. These configurations, he said. They're not random and they're not navigational. They're temporal. Rush looked up. Explain. The prophets communicate outside linear time. When they show you something, it's not a map of space, it's a map of moments. Convergences. Sisko moved along the wall slowly. These star patterns aren't showing where Destiny has been. They're showing when certain things happened. Intersections. He stopped at a section of the wall where the pattern was denser, more complex. This one is recent. Rush crossed the chamber to stand beside him. Stared at the configuration. The color left his face in a way that happened rarely enough that Sisko noted it. That's Destiny's current position, Rush said quietly. And that, he pointed to a secondary cluster adjacent to it, is a warp signature. A specific warp signature. He turned to look at Sisko with an expression that was not quite wonder and not quite alarm and sat somewhere deeply uncomfortable between them. The ship knew you were coming. The comm on Sisko's combadge chirped. He pressed it. Sisko. Captain? Worf's voice, clipped and certain. The Defiant's long-range sensors have detected 3 vessels on an intercept course. Configuration unknown. They are not responding to hails and their approach vector is deliberate. ETA 14 minutes. Sisko looked at Rush. Rush looked at the console. We'll continue this, Sisko said, and moved for the corridor. The briefing was fast because it had to be. Young pulled his senior staff and Sisko's officers into the gate room, the largest space with working displays, and Eli threw the sensor data onto the main screen with the efficiency of someone who'd run this particular drill too many times. 3 vessels. Roughly the size of the Defiant. Angular construction that Destiny's database flagged with a single-word identifier that Greer read aloud with the flat tone of a man reading a threat assessment. Raiders, Greer said. Database calls them opportunistic. They track Destiny's power signature between FTL jumps and move in during resupply stops. We've encountered them 4 times. Lost 2 people the 3rd time. Dax was studying the configuration with her tricorder. Their whole composition suggests they've been doing this for a long time. Salvage modifications. I'm seeing components from at least 6 different vessel types in their superstructure. They adapt what they take. Can the Defiant's weapons handle them? Young asked. Sisko looked at Kira, who had joined Viacom from the Defiant's bridge. Major? Phasers are at full capacity. Quantum torpedoes, we have 11. Their hulls look like they'll respond to directed energy. I'd rather not find out the hard way. We won't have to, Sisko said. He looked at Young. Combined defensive posture. Destiny's shields supplemented by the Defiant on her port flank. That's the direction they'll probe first, her weakest grid. Young studied him. The calculation happening behind his eyes was visible, not distrust exactly, but the evaluation of a man deciding how far to extend operational confidence to someone he'd known for less than a day. Greer, Young said. Take a fire team to the lower observation deck. Manual defense protocols. He looked at Worf. Commander, you have experience with boarding actions? Worf drew himself to his full height with the air of a man being asked if he's familiar with breathing. Extensive experience. Then you're with Greer. Young turned to Eli. Get O'Brien back to whatever he was doing to our power grid and tell him to make it fast. I want those distribution irregularities stabilized before we take hits. O'Brien's voice came through before Eli could relay it. He'd been on the open channel the entire time. Already on it, Colonel. Give me 8 minutes. You have 6. A pause. Sir? The 3 raider vessels came in low and fast, using Destiny's own bulk as sensor cover for their approach, a tactic that spoke to long familiarity with the ancient ship's blind spots. They had done this before. They knew where the wounds were. What they didn't know was that the wounded ship had company. The Defiant dropped her nose and came about on thrusters alone, no warp, no room for it. Sliding into the port flank position with a precision that made Eli audibly exhale in relief. Her running lights cut, whole dark against the starfield, she looked exactly like what she was, a warship that had been built for exactly this kind of fight. The lead raider adjusted course. The Defiant's phaser array answered before it finished the maneuver. The fight lasted 9 minutes. It felt longer. Combat against opponents who knew the terrain always did. The raiders used Destiny's sensor shadow with practiced efficiency, cutting across her bow to force the Defiant into a pursuit angle that would expose Destiny's already stressed port grid. It was a good tactic. It had probably worked before, against less maneuverable vessels or crews less accustomed to operating in tight quarters. Kira didn't pursue. She held position and made them come to her. The lead raider took 2 phaser strikes along its forward hull, precisely placed, the kind of shooting that came from a gunner who understood that disabling was sometimes more tactically useful than destroying. It shed speed and veered wide, trailing ionized atmosphere from a breach in its secondary propulsion. The second vessel broke off its approach vector entirely, reassessing. The third, smaller, faster, made a run at Destiny's lower hull directly. Greer saw it on the observation deck monitors. "They're going for the docking clamps," he said. "Boarding." Worf was already moving. "They will not reach them." What followed in the lower corridors was brief, efficient, and decisive in the way that things tend to be when one side includes a Klingon who has been sitting in a diplomatic meeting for 3 hours and has opinions about that. The boarding party. 6 raiders, armed with energy weapons that left scorched channels in Destiny's ancient walls, came through a forced hull junction expecting resistance from the undermanned crew they'd probed before. They encountered Worf and Greer, and 2 of Greer's people, which under other circumstances would have been sufficient. But Worf moved through the corridor with the particular controlled violence of a warrior who considered this a moderate level of difficulty, and the boarding party's tactical cohesion lasted approximately 40 seconds before it became a series of individual problems, each one solved with finality. "Impressive," Greer said, breathing hard, looking at the result. Worf straightened his uniform. "They were not prepared for opposition. We're taking the ones who are still conscious to the gate room," Greer said. "Young will want to ask them things." "Indeed," Worf said, which landed differently than he intended, and Greer filed it away as something to mention to Eli later. Outside, the remaining 2 raider vessels had recalibrated. They hung at distance now. Far enough to be outside immediate weapons range, close enough to make their intention clear. Watching. Reassessing the target that had suddenly grown teeth it wasn't supposed to have. On Destiny's bridge, Rush was watching them back with an attention that went beyond tactical. "They're not leaving," he said. "They're regrouping," Young said. "No." Rush pulled up a secondary sensor reading, overlaid it on the main display. "Look at their emissions pattern. They're not communicating with each other, they're transmitting outward. Long range." He traced the signal vector with one finger. "They're reporting back." The bridge went quiet in the specific way it did when a manageable problem revealed a larger shape behind it. "Reporting to who?" Eli asked. Rush didn't answer immediately, which was its own kind of answer. Sisko had been standing at the edge of the sensor station, watching, letting Young run his bridge the way a competent guest lets the hosts manage their own house. Now he stepped forward. "Can you decode the transmission?" "Working on it," Eli said, fingers moving. "It's layered, encrypted in something I haven't seen before. But the carrier frequency..." He stopped. Looked up. "It matches something in Destiny's database. From one of the early survey missions. A faction we encountered in this sector about 8 months ago." "What faction?" Young asked. Eli pulled the file. "Read it." His expression did the thing it did when the news was bad enough that he was deciding how to frame it. "We called them the Observers. Because every time we encountered them, they just watched. Scanned us. Didn't engage." He looked at the 2 vessels on screen. Turns out they weren't just watching. They were cataloging. Waiting for something specific to show up. "The Defiant," Sisko said. It wasn't a question. "Something on the Defiant," Rush corrected. He was very still in the way that meant his mind was moving very fast. "Or something that the Defiant's arrival activated." He turned from the screen and walked toward the corridor without explaining himself, which was standard, and Young's jaw tightened, which was also standard. "Rush." "The chamber," Rush said, not stopping. "I need to go back to the chamber." Kira had docked the Defiant via umbilical during the lull, combat protocols, keeping the crew consolidated. And now she stood in Destiny's corridor outside the sealed section with Sisko and Rush and the particular expression of a Bajoran woman who had walked into enough situations that felt spiritually significant to develop a professional skepticism about all of them. "You said the door opened for you," she said to Sisko. "It did. But not for Rush. It responded to his scans. It didn't open." She looked at the sealed bulkhead. The outline of the door. The old, dark material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She had been in the presence of orb artifacts her entire life. The particular quality of a thing that existed in multiple time frames simultaneously was not unfamiliar to her. It felt like standing next to a deep current. Like the air had weight it normally kept hidden. "The prophets don't speak to everyone," she said quietly. "They speak to who they need to. The ancients operated similarly," Rush said, studying his tricorder with barely contained frustration. "Nonlinear communication through selected individuals. Selective technological response." He looked at her. "Your connection to the orb brought you here." The ship responded to Cisco. "And this chamber," he gestured at the sealed door, "has an energy signature that has been building since you both arrived." Kira looked at Cisco. Cisco looked at the door. "Major," he said, "would you like to try?" Kira stepped forward, placed her hand flat against the old dark material. The door opened. And beyond it, the star-pattern chamber was no longer dormant. The central console was alive with light. The light from the console moved like water. Not the clean blue-white of Federation interfaces or the sharp geometric displays Kira knew from Cardassian-built systems, or even the warm amber of Bajoran ceremonial lamps. This was older than any of those, a luminescence that seemed to exist just below the threshold of direct observation, so that looking at it straight on produced less information than catching it at the edge of vision. It pulsed with the patience of something that had been waiting a very long time and had no anxiety about the wait. Kira stood at the threshold and felt the current she'd sensed through the door intensify. Not threatening. Not the cold pressure of a Paretha's proximity, or the hollow pull of a damaged orb fragment. Something else. Something that rhymed with the feeling she'd carried since childhood in the temples. The specific quality of being in the presence of a mind that thought in timescales she couldn't hold in her own. "Major." Cisco's voice was steady beside her. "What do you feel?" "Attention," she said. "It's paying attention to us." Rush pushed past both of them, which was predictable, and stopped 2 feet from the console, which was less predictable. He held his ground, scanning, not touching. Which told Cisco that whatever his tricorder was reading had given even Rush sufficient pause to resist his default impulse. "The energy output has increased 400% since we entered," Rush said. "But it's not drawing from Destiny's main grid. It's drawing from—" He stopped. Rechecked the reading. "It's drawing from the Defiant." Kira's hand went to her comm-match. "Kira to O'Brien." "O'Brien here, Major." "Already on it, whatever it is." The Defiant's secondary power grid just started draining toward the umbilical connection. "I've got about 12% of our reserve going somewhere I can't trace." "Don't stop it," Cisco said. A pause. "Captain?" "Let it run, Chief. Monitor it. Don't interrupt it." Another pause, the particular silence of Miles O'Brien deciding whether his professional judgment about power systems outweighed a direct order. "Aye, sir." "Monitoring." Rush turned from the console. His expression had undergone one of its rare full revisions, the habitual calculations stripped back to something closer to genuine uncertainty, which on Rush looked almost like vulnerability. "The chamber is using the Defiant's power signature as a key," he said. "Specifically, the warp core's fundamental frequency. The Cochrane constant." He looked at Cisco. "Whoever built this room anticipated the arrival of a warp-capable vessel. Specifically. Not ancient propulsion. Not gold. Warp drive." He let that land. "They were expecting you. Not you personally, but your technology. Your kind of technology." "How long ago was this chamber built?" Kira asked. "Conservative estimate based on material degradation?" Rush said. 50 million years. The console's light shifted. The star patterns on the walls responded, the constellation narratives brightening and moving, rearranging themselves into new configurations that Kira watched with the trained attention of someone who had spent years learning to read nonlinear communication. "It's showing a sequence," she said. A record, Cisco said beside her, reading it differently but arriving at the same understanding. Like a log. Events. But not in order, layered. The way the prophets show. Captain? Rush's voice had changed register entirely. Look at the final configuration. At the far end of the dome, the star patterns had resolved into something sharper than the rest, more deliberate, more recent feeling despite the age of the room. A central point. Radiating lines. And at the terminus of the longest line, a cluster that Dax, who had just arrived, slightly out of breath, tricorder already running, identified in under 10 seconds. That's the galactic barrier, Dax said. The edge of the Milky Way. Our galaxy. She looked up. Destiny's route, where does it terminate? Rush was already running the calculation. The answer arrived and he stood with it for a moment before sharing it, which meant it was significant enough that even he wanted a second alone with it first. Destiny's projected terminal coordinates, he said. Place her final destination at a point beyond the galactic barrier. In the intergalactic medium between the Milky Way and the nearest neighboring galaxy. He looked at Dax. Which from your navigational charts would be? The void, Dax said quietly. We've detected anomalous energy readings from that region for decades. The Federation has never been able to investigate at sufficient range. She looked at the star map on the wall. We always assumed it was a natural phenomenon. It is not, Rush said, with the certainty of a man who had spent 3 years becoming fluent in ancient intentions. The ancients detected something at the origin of the universe. Something that required a ship launched millions of years in advance to reach it at the right moment. He turned to look at them both. And the resonance frequency that brought the Defiant here, the orb energy, the Bajoran wormhole, the prophets who exist outside linear time. They knew, Kira said. Not a question. Not surprise exactly. The particular tone of a believer who has just had a mystery deepen rather than resolve. They've always known about this. They sent you here, Rush said. Or allowed you to come here. Which for beings outside linear time is the same thing. He looked at Cisco with an expression that was as close to asking for something as Rush ever got. The prophets communicate with you. And this ship, this room, was built to receive that communication and translate it into something a crew could act on. He gestured at the console. Which means you may be the only person on either vessel capable of understanding what Destiny's mission actually is. Cisco looked at the console for a long time. 50 million years of waiting, resolved into light that moved like water, in a room that had been built for a meeting no one aboard either ship had known they were coming to. We'll need Colonel Young, he said. Rush's expression suggested he'd been hoping Cisco wouldn't say that. Yes, Cisco said, reading him clearly. We will. Young listened without interrupting, which Cisco had already identified as one of his more useful qualities. He stood in the chamber with his arms crossed and his weight settled in the way of a man who had learned to absorb difficult information without letting it show on his face, because showing it on his face had consequences for the people watching him. He looked at the console, the star maps, Rush's tricorder data, Kira's account of what she'd felt through the door, Dax's navigational overlay matching the chamber's final configuration to Federation charts of the galactic barrier anomaly. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. So, he said. An alien civilization that existed 50 million years ago built a room on this ship specifically for a crew that hadn't evolved yet, in anticipation of a meeting with beings from another dimension who exist outside time, who arrange for a starship from a parallel galaxy to be transported here through an ancient wormhole to provide a power key. Because together we can decode a mission that was launched before multicellular life existed on Earth. That's broadly accurate, Eli said. Rush, Young said. How long have you known pieces of this? Rush's expression did not change. I've had components for approximately 8 months. The framework for 6. The confirmation of the warp frequency key. How long, Nicholas? A pause. Long enough that I should have brought it to you sooner. The honesty was rare enough that it functioned as its own kind of admission. Young uncrossed his arms. All right. What do we need to do? Rush pulled up the integration schematic he'd been building since the previous night. Sisko saw from the complexity of it that Rush had not slept, had probably not intended to sleep, and that the unauthorized work he'd been doing on the Defiant's navigational computer had not been the opportunistic theft of data it might have appeared, but a deliberate attempt to complete a connection he'd understood was necessary before he'd been able to explain why. He still didn't love it. The method remained problematic, but the intent was more complicated than sabotage. Destiny's core navigation has always operated on an incomplete dataset, Rush said. The ship knows her terminus coordinates but has been unable to calculate the precise arrival window. The timing matters. The anomaly beyond the galactic barrier has a temporal pulse, and arriving outside that window means arriving at empty space. He indicated the schematic. The Defiant's navigational computer uses a fundamentally different calculation method, Cochrane-based warp field geometry mapped against quantum state stellar positioning. It fills the exact gap in Destiny's dataset. He looked at Young, then Sisko. Together, the two systems can calculate not just where to go but when. When you say together, O'Brien said, he had arrived somewhere in the last 10 minutes, tricorder already integrated into the schematic display. You mean a physical integration of the two systems? A temporary bridge, Rush said. Using the umbilical connection already established. 3 hours of combined processing. O'Brien studied the schematic with the focused skepticism of a man who understood exactly what was being proposed, and had a specific list of ways it could go wrong. The power draw we're already seeing from the Defiant will increase. Significantly. Manageable, Rush said. I'll be the judge of that, O'Brien said, not rudely but with complete conviction, and Rush, to his credit, did not argue. Young looked at Sisko. Your call on the Defiant systems. Sisko considered it the way he considered most things, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular thoroughness of a man who had learned that decisions made in the middle of complicated situations had a way of echoing. The prophets had brought them here. The evidence for that was as strong as evidence for anything he'd encountered since the wormhole, and he had learned to trust the pattern even when the pattern was uncomfortable. Do it, he said. Chief, you supervise the integration on the Defiant's end. Nothing connects without your sign-off. Understood, sir. I'll work with Dr. Rush on the Destiny interface, Dax said, already moving toward the console with the focused pleasure of a scientist who had found her problem. The integration took 4 hours. O'Brien's estimate, not Rush's. For most of those 4 hours, the two vessels sat coupled in the dark while the observers held their distance, still transmitting, still waiting, the long-range signal still going somewhere that hadn't answered yet. Worf monitored them from the Defiant's bridge with the professional patience of a man who considered vigilance a form of respect for the enemy. Greer ran rotating watch shifts on Destiny's hull access points. Kira remained in the chamber, not at the console but near it, because the light still moved and she was still reading it. Sisko joined her at the 2-hour mark. You're not watching the integration, she said. O'Brien and Dax between them are the most qualified people I've ever seen in the same room, he said. They don't need me watching. Kira almost smiled. Rush is making O'Brien's eye twitch. Rush makes everyone's eye twitch. Sisko looked at the star patterns on the wall. What are you reading? The same sequence. But I keep coming back to the central point. She indicated the configuration she'd been studying. In orb visions, when the prophets show you a fixed point, a moment that doesn't move when everything around it shifts, it means it's load-bearing. The whole structure of what they're showing you depends on it. Sisko looked at the fixed point in the chamber's star map. The terminus beyond the galactic barrier. Whatever is there, he said, has been there since before the ancients ascended. And the prophets know about it, Kira said. They've always known. She turned to look at him. Benjamin. What if the thing the ancients were investigating, the signal in the cosmic background radiation, What if it's the same thing the prophets have been protecting us from understanding too early? The console pulsed once, sharply, as if registering the question. In the corridor outside, Eli's voice came through the ship calm with the particular tone he used when the news was complicated. Colonel Young, the integration just completed. And you need to see what the combined system calculated. A beat. Destiny's arrival window at the terminus opens in 72 hours. 72 hours. The number sat in the middle of the briefing like an object everyone was walking around carefully. Young had called the full senior staff of both vessels, standing room only in Destiny's gate room, the only space that accommodated everyone, the ancient ring artifact at its center dormant, and indifferent to the urgency of the beings gathered around it. Eli had the calculations on the main display. The combined navigational output of Destiny's ancient systems and the Defiant's Cochrane-based geometry was, in his words, the most precise piece of stellar calculation he had ever seen, produced by two systems that shouldn't have been compatible and were anyway, in the way that things sometimes worked when the universe had already decided what it needed to happen. The terminus coordinates were fixed. The arrival window was 72 hours, opening and closing over a 6-hour period. Miss it and the next window, if there was a next window, was incalculable. What are we flying into? Young asked. Rush pulled the display forward. The anomaly beyond the galactic barrier has been detectable from your galaxy for decades, according to Dax's records. From our approach vector, Destiny's sensors have been resolving it progressively for the last 8 months. At this range, he indicated the enhanced reading. It is not a natural phenomenon. It's a structure, Dax said. Artificial. Massive. The energy output is consistent with something running on a power source we don't have a classification for. Something the ancients built, Sisko said. Something the ancients found, Rush corrected. The chamber's records suggest the signal predates the ancients. Significantly, the ancients detected it, investigated it, launched Destiny toward it, and then ascended before they could interpret what they'd found. Destiny has been traveling toward it for millions of years on automated systems, waiting for a crew capable of completing the investigation. And the prophets? Kira said. The prophets exist outside linear time, Sisko said. If this structure is what Rush is suggesting, something old enough and powerful enough that even the ancients couldn't contextualize it, beings who exist outside time would be aware of it. Would have been aware of it always. He looked at the display. They sent us here to be part of this. Worf had been standing with his arms crossed through all of it. Now he spoke. The observers are still transmitting. Whatever they are reporting, it concerns this development. Someone out here has an interest in Destiny not reaching that terminus. How long before whoever they're reporting to arrives? Young asked. Unknown, Worf said, which he clearly found personally offensive. Their signal is encrypted beyond our current decryption capability. But the transmission increased in frequency after the integration was completed. They know what we've done. Young looked at Sisko. Sisko looked back. The conversation that passed between them didn't require words. Two commanding officers recognizing the same decision point from their respective sides of it. We could go to FTL immediately, Young said. Get ahead of whatever they're reporting to. And if we jump before we understand what we're going into? Sisko said. We've jumped into situations we didn't understand before. With respect, Colonel, you've had to. You've been in survival mode. That's not the same as choosing to approach something of this magnitude blind because we're afraid of what's behind us. Sisko's voice was measured but not soft. We spend the time we have preparing. We understand what we can. We go in with our eyes open. Young's jaw worked. Not disagreement exactly, recognition that the argument was correct and the instinct that drove it was a habit 3 years of desperate survival had made very deeply grooved. 48 hours of preparation, he said. Then we move. 48. Sisko agreed. They divided the work. O'Brien and Dax ran continuous diagnostics on the integration bridge, stress-testing the combined navigational system against every scenario O'Brien's considerable experience could generate. Rush worked on decoding the chamber's records further, with Kira as interpreter. A collaboration that produced visible friction every 40 minutes and surprisingly productive results in between, because Rush understood ancient systems the way a linguist understands grammar and Kira understood nonlinear communication the way someone who has lived inside it understands weather. Bashir set up a joint medical station and spent 12 hours with Destiny's medical database, which contained biological data from civilizations so ancient that Federation xenobiology had no frame for most of it. He worked with the focused absorption of a man who had found a library he hadn't known existed and was in danger of never leaving it. Worf trained with Greer's fire team. Not because either of them requested it, but because they ended up in the same corridor at the same hour running the same drills by separate instinct, and after 20 minutes of parallel operation they adjusted their spacing without comment and ran the rest together. Their respective combat philosophies, Klingon directness and military precision against Greer's adaptable pragmatism, turned out to complement each other in ways that neither would have predicted, and both filed away without fanfare. Young found Sisko in the observation deck at hour 36. The viewport framed the dark between galaxies, the particular black of intergalactic space, emptier than anything either of them had seen before, with the Milky Way visible as a smear of light at one edge of the frame. "You've done this before," Young said. "Walked into something with religious significance attached to it, and had to be the one responsible for the people around you." "More times than I'd choose," Sisko said. "How do you hold it? The weight of what it means against the weight of what you're responsible for." Sisko was quiet for a moment. Outside, the dark held its depth. "I stopped trying to separate them," he said. "What it means is part of what I'm responsible for. The people I'm responsible for are part of what it means." He looked at Young. "You've been carrying your crew for 3 years in a situation that should have broken the command structure 4 times over. You haven't let it." He paused. "That's not a small thing." Young looked at the Milky Way's edge. "Rush decoded another layer of the chamber records 2 hours ago." "I know. He told me. He told you before he told me." "I noticed." Sisko said it without judgment. "What did it say?" "That the structure at the terminus isn't a destination," Young said. "It's a threshold." He looked at Sisko. "The ancients were trying to find out what's on the other side of the universe. And they built this ship to carry whoever was ready to look. The Defiant's running lights were visible through the viewport, holding station, small and definite against the immensity of the dark." "Are we ready?" Young asked. Sisko considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "We're what's here," he said. "That'll have to be enough." At hour 47, the observers stopped transmitting. It was Worf who noticed, monitoring the Defiant's long-range sensors from her bridge with the methodical attention he gave to everything that could precede violence. And the silence was worse than the signal had been. A transmitting enemy is an enemy still deciding. An enemy that has stopped transmitting has finished deciding. "They've been joined," Worf said. "I'm reading 3 additional vessels on long range. Larger." The configuration is consistent with the observer's superstructure but significantly scaled, carrier class, if their technology follows the same principles. Young's voice came through the comm from Destiny's bridge. "Weapon status? Unknown. But they are accelerating on an intercept vector. ETA to weapons range, 22 minutes. That's our window." Eli's voice cut in, strained. "The terminus window opens in 19 minutes. If we go to FTL now, we clear the intercept. If we wait, we fight our way through." Greer finished. "We go," Young said. "Both ships. Now." The FTL jump sequence took 4 minutes to spin up, 4 minutes in which the observer fleet closed the distance with the patience of something that had been waiting long enough that 22 minutes was nothing to them. The 3 original Raider vessels moved with the larger ships, flanking formation, keeping the gap tight enough that any course change by destiny would bring her across their weapons arc. Sisko ran the Defiant's tactical from her bridge, Kira at weapons, Dax at helm, Worf reading the incoming fleet's formation with the running commentary of a tactician identifying patterns in real time. "They're not targeting destiny," Worf said. "They're targeting the umbilical connection. They want to separate the vessels before the jump." "They know what the integration does," Dax said. "They know we need both ships at the terminus." "Kira," Sisko said. "Ready," she said, which on Kira meant she had been ready for several minutes and was being patient about not having been asked sooner. "Defensive spread on my mark. We're not disabling them, we're buying destiny 4 minutes." "Understood." The lead observer carrier opened fire first. A directed energy weapon unlike anything in either crew's direct experience. A sustained beam of pale violet light that hit Destiny's port shield and pushed it down 12% in under 3 seconds. Ancient shielding, millions of years old, absorbed it with a groan that resonated through the hull as a physical vibration. Eli's voice on the comm reported the grid status with the controlled urgency of a man trying not to sound as alarmed as he was. The Defiant pivoted on Kira's instinct, not Sisko's order. She had read the second carrier's targeting solution before it fired and put the Defiant's reinforced bow between the beam and Destiny's already stressed port grid. The hit rocked the ship hard enough that O'Brien's repair work to the secondary grid immediately proved its worth. A junction that would have blown under the impact held, redistributed, held again. "Good call, Major," Sisko said. "Thank you, sir," Kira said, already recalculating the next intercept angle. The phaser array answered, 3 precision strikes that didn't aim for hulls but for the targeting systems that were visible as energy nodes on the carrier's forward section. Federation phasers, precisely calibrated, fired by someone who understood exactly what she was shooting at. The first carrier's beam weapon flickered. The second carrier adjusted, slower now. 2 minutes, Eli reported. "FTL in 2 minutes." The raider vessels made their run at the umbilical. Worf had anticipated it. The Defiant's aft phasers tracked them before they completed the approach vector, and quantum torpedoes 1 and 2 left their tubes in a spread that turned the lead raider's attempt into a debris field and convinced the second one to reconsider. Quantum torpedo 3 hit the third raider directly. It did not reconsider anything. 1 minute, Eli said. The carrier fleet fired in concert. All 3 large vessels, all targeting Destiny's port grid simultaneously, clearly having determined that the Defiant could be managed if the ancient ship's shielding could be dropped first. The combined beam hit Destiny like a wall. The shield dropped 40% in 2 seconds. 5% remained. Then 3. On Destiny's bridge, Young watched the grid collapse and did not order the FTL sequence aborted. "Jump," he said. The Defiant's umbilical disengaged at the same moment Destiny's FTL drives engaged. O'Brien had been holding his hand over the manual release for 90 seconds, which was not regulation and was absolutely correct, and both ships entered the jump in the same instant, the observer fleet's next salvo passing through space that was already empty. FTL transit lasted 6 hours. No one slept. Most of them gathered in whatever space felt right for the kind of waiting that isn't really waiting. Bashir and the Destiny medical staff running final injury assessments from the battle, O'Brien and Eli running post-transit diagnostics in companionable near silence, Worf and Greer running their fire teams through post-engagement protocols that were almost identical despite coming from different traditions, which neither of them commented on. Kira stayed in the chamber. The console's light had been changing throughout the battle, not in response to tactical events, she didn't think, but in the way that things change when they can feel themselves approaching something. The star patterns had resolved into a single configuration now, the narrative collapsed to its final image. The fixed point. The threshold. Sisko came in at hour 5. "We're close," she said. "I know." He stood beside her. Looked at the final configuration on the wall. "Whatever we find, whatever it is on the other side of that threshold, I don't think we were sent here to cross it." Kira looked at him. "I think we were sent here to see it." he said. To bring back the knowledge that it exists. To give both our peoples the chance to understand what's been at the edge of the universe waiting. He paused. The prophets don't send you to destinations. They send you to understandings. The console pulsed once, with the warmth she'd only ever felt from the orbs in the deepest hours of prayer. FTL dropout in 60 seconds, Eli's voice came through the ship. All hands. The two crews stood at their stations and waited for the universe to show them what it had been keeping. The ships dropped out of FTL. And beyond the viewports, at the edge of everything, something vast and ancient and impossibly patient waited in the light. It was not a station. Not a ship. Not a weapon. The closest word either crew had for it was temple, and both crews arrived at the word independently, in the first 30 seconds of sensor contact, through the particular cognitive process that happens when the mind encounters something so far outside its reference frame that it reaches for metaphor because literal description hasn't been invented yet. It was constructed. That much was certain. Geometry that precise, symmetry that sustained across a structure 11,000 kilometers in diameter, did not occur without intention. The material was neither metal nor stone nor any composite in either civilization's database, and its surface absorbed electromagnetic radiation in every band except one, a narrow frequency in the visible spectrum that rendered it in a deep, warm gold that should have looked garish against the intergalactic dark and instead looked exactly right. The way things look when they've had millions of years to settle into their correct appearance. It was not transmitting. It was not active in any detectable sense. It simply existed, with the enormous quiet authority of something that had been here long enough that existence itself was its statement. Sensors, Young said quietly. Running, Eli said, equally quiet. The material, I can't identify it. It's not in any database. Not ancient, not gold, not Asgard, not anything we encountered on this journey. He looked up. Whatever built this is not anything that left other traces. Across the umbilical, now re-engaged for power sharing, Dax was running her own analysis. Her voice came through the calm with the focused wonder of someone who had lived 8 lifetimes and was experiencing something genuinely new. The energy signature we've been detecting from the Milky Way, it's a resonant harmonic of the structure's own output. It's been broadcasting passively for as long as the universe has had the physics to carry the signal. She paused. Benjamin. It's been broadcasting since before the ancients existed. Since before multicellular life existed. Since the beginning, Kira said from the chamber. She was still there, at the console, which was fully active now, the star patterns resolved into a single brilliant image that matched, in every detail, the structure beyond the viewport. The prophets always said the celestial temple was the beginning. I thought that was metaphor. Perhaps, Sisko said from the bridge. It was accurate in ways they couldn't explain to us yet. Rush had not spoken since dropout. He stood at his station with his hands flat on the console, looking at the structure with an expression that had moved through calculation and wonder and something approaching grief. The grief of a man who has spent 3 years convinced that understanding the universe's origin was a problem for mathematics, and was now confronted with evidence that mathematics was only part of the language required. Young watched him for a moment. Rush exhaled. We can't cross the threshold, he said. Not with these ships. Not with these crews. The energy required, it would take a ZPM. Several ZPMs. Technology we don't have. He turned from the display. But we can document it. Everything Destiny's sensors can record. Everything the Defiant sensors can add. The combined dataset, it will take decades to fully analyze. Centuries, possibly. He looked at the structure. But it will tell us what the ancients were trying to find. What the signal means. Why it was sent. And the prophets? Kira asked through the calm. The prophets already know what it is, Sisko said. They've always known. They sent us here so that we could know it too. He paused. So our people could know. Young looked at the structure for a long time. 3 years of survival. 3 years of resource management, and crew conflicts, and the grinding daily weight of leading people who couldn't go home, toward a destination he hadn't understood and hadn't fully trusted. Standing here, at the edge of the universe, looking at something that had been waiting since before the first star ignited. "Start recording," he said. "Everything. Every band, every frequency, every sensor we have on both ships. We record for as long as we have power to do it." "Already started," Eli said. "Quietly. About 30 seconds ago." Young nodded. "That was right. That was Eli. They stayed for 18 hours. The structure gave no further sign of awareness, or if it was aware, as Kira remained certain it was, it expressed that awareness through the same patient, luminescent quiet it had maintained for the duration of the universe. The sensors ran. The data accumulated in volumes that would take both civilizations' best minds working in concert to interpret. In the chamber, the console's light gentled, not fading but settling, the way a face settles after saying something important. The star patterns held their final configuration without further movement. The waiting that Kira had felt from the moment she touched the door had resolved into something she could only call completion. Sisko sat with her, in the last hour, in silence that needed nothing added to it. "We're going to need to find a way to get you home," he said eventually. "You first," she said. "The rift that brought us here, Rush thinks the chamber's records contain the harmonic key to reproduce it. Controlled this time. A calculated opening." He looked at the console. "The prophets sent us here to receive something. I think part of what we received is the means to return." She looked at him. "And Destiny?" He was quiet for a moment. "Destiny has her next mission," he said. "This was one destination. The data we've recorded points to others. The ancients seeded more than one thread. Destiny follows them." He paused. "Young knows that now. He knew it before we arrived. He just needed to see what the destination was worth." The departure sequence was methodical and unhurried. Joint sensor logs duplicated across both ships' cores. The navigational integration left in place for the rift calculation. O'Brien and Eli working the power requirements side by side with the easy efficiency of engineers who had stopped noticing the cultural gap 2 days ago. Worf and Greer exchanged a look at the docking umbilical as the Defiant prepared to cast off. No words. The nod they exchanged belonged to a language older than either of their cultures. Young and Sisko stood at the viewport as the Defiant maneuvered clear. "If your people and mine ever find each other," Young said. "They will," Sisko said, with the particular certainty of a man who has learned to trust patterns. "They will." The rift opened with the warm, deep frequency of something that had been waiting to be asked. The Defiant slipped through, carrying 18 hours of data that would reshape Federation cosmology, xenobiology, and theology simultaneously. Destiny held her course. In the chamber, the console dimmed slowly to its former quiet. Its purpose served, its patience renewed, already waiting for the next crew the universe would send to need it. Eli ran his hand along a corridor wall as he walked back to the bridge. The ancient metal was cold and very old and had, in its long silent way, brought them to the edge of everything. "Good ship," he said quietly. Destiny, as always, did not answer. But somewhere in her deep systems, in the automated processes that had run for millions of years without being asked, a new set of coordinates resolved, the next thread the ancients had left, the next door the data pointed toward. The mission continued. It had always been continuing. Chevron 7 locked. The data the Defiant carried home redefined questions Federation science hadn't known to ask. What the sensors recorded in 18 hours of contact with the structure at the universe's edge would occupy the Daystrom Institute for a generation, not because it answered the question of what lay beyond the threshold, but because it proved, with the precision of combined ancient and Federation sensor technology, that the question was real. That something had built a door at the edge of everything. That the signal in the background radiation of the universe was not noise. Aboard Destiny, the crew carried something different. Not data, exactly, or not only data. The weight of having arrived somewhere, for the first time in 3 years, that felt like a destination rather than a waypoint. Young held his crew together with the same pragmatic authority as before, but the atmosphere shifted in the weeks that followed, the grinding survival anxiety replaced by something steadier. They had seen what they were traveling toward. That changed the journey. The observer fleet did not return. Whatever they had been reporting to, whatever force had an interest in preventing Destiny's arrival at the terminus, it had either accepted the outcome or was calculating a longer response. Rush believed the latter. Young planned accordingly. In the chamber, the console stayed quiet. Waiting, as it had always waited, with the patience of something built by minds that understood time differently than the beings who inherited their work. The next coordinates were already resolved. The next mission had already begun. Destiny flew on, into the deep and ancient dark, carrying her crew toward whatever the ancients had left to be found. It was enough. Indeed. Hit the subscribe button for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching.